Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. I'm reporting back on the FIDE Grand Prix tournament, the second FIDE Grand Prix tournament taking place in Belgrade. And we're getting to the end of the group stage. They've played 5 rounds so far, just 1 game to go. And remember, the players have to top their group in order to qualify for the knockout stage. I want to show you a really exciting game between Alexei Shirov and Vladimir Fedoseev. Well, Alexei, always worth watching. You know, he just doesn't compromise at all. And Fedoseev also a really enterprising player as well. These players are not afraid to take risks, and we saw that in their first game actually in the tournament, with colours reversed of course. So we have a Sveshnikov on the board. Shirov plays knight b5 of course, and then d6, and then bishop g5 is kind of the main line, but knight d5 has become very popular since 2018 and the World Championship match between Caruana and Carlsen. So because of the threat to play knight c7 check, then this knight should be exchanged. So that changes the pawn structure, which obviously changes strategy now. The knight is attacked. Carlsen has played knight b8 with some success, but most players nowadays go knight e7, spinning this knight round to the king side. And of course this occurred in well, a couple of the games of the World Championship match. And here knight g6 is overwhelmingly the most popular move here, or at least let's say it's the move that nowadays is played, really, you know, following Carlsen's lead. And it does mean that very often this pawn is free to advance, and when the pawn comes to e4, the knight can hop into e5. But instead of that, Fedoseev played knight f5, and that is these days really rather unusual. Although it has to be said, the knight doesn't look badly placed on f5 because it might be able to hop into the d4 square. Bishop d3, but this is really the reason why this move is somewhat frowned upon, that the bishop sort of has the knight in its sights. Nevertheless, I mean, it's really still looks absolutely fine for black. When you see this is a nice development of the bishop on g7, which can support the knight coming into d4. And in those circumstances, you just kind of think, well, black can't be worse here. This looks absolutely fine. I mean, previously white has tried a few moves here. b3 is quite reasonable. Maybe the bishop can come here or here. But Shirov, after about 9.5 minutes thought, played bishop takes knight on f5. And the computer rather likes this move. I don't know if Alexei realised that. Thinking for 9.5 minutes suggests to me that this might be improvisation. But in fact, it has been played by a seriously strong player before, and that's Maksudlu, Parham Maksudlu from Iran. Okay, let's have a look at this. So bishop takes, of course. Bishop e3. So why did Shirov give up, you know, one of his nice bishops for this knight? Well, it kind of clears the situation. You know, if we come back to here, the bishop would like to come to e3, but of course at the moment you don't want to give up that beautiful dark square bishop for the knight. So Shirov has given up the other bishop, which maybe isn't as important, in order to play his bishop to this very nice square on e3. It's anchored by the f-pawn and looks at these key squares, c5 and b6. Now black has to watch out for this check, so Fedoseev castled. And queen d2 looks, to my eyes, the most sensible move here. And white is basically aiming to get in c5, and then this passed d-pawn has potential. And it's also nice to control this diagonal as well. But instead, Shirov played queen b3. Now, to my eyes, this is really surprising. But it's so typical of Alexei. Okay, why do I find this surprising? Well, because it allows black's bishop in here, into this fantastic square. I mean, quite an obvious move, really. Alexei would not have overlooked this move. But it's the fact that he was prepared to allow this. And after the rook moves, e4 just anchors that bishop in the middle of the board. It is a starfish bish. It looks fantastic on this square. And now that the e-pawn has advanced, then this bishop rakes across the board. And to my eyes, this looks absolutely fantastic for black. So why did Shirov go in for this? Well, he'd obviously seen that he could break with c5 and get his own play rolling through the middle of the board. But still, having this bishop just locked in the middle like that, I would not have allowed that. But let's see what happens. f5 from Fedoseev. Well, that looks very logical because now with the bishop on e3, f5, f4 looks so inviting. And suddenly, well, that king is lacking defenders. Shirov took on d6. So it's like a game of chicken. They're just kind of crossing each other in the middle of the board, just kind of ignoring each other. Who's going to back down? Who's going to defend first? Well, Fedoseev just pushed on. I mean, you don't need to play like that. b5 kind of shuts out white's pieces and gives black the option to play this move. But anyway, f4, bishop b6. And here, I think it's possible just to take that pawn. I mean, maybe he was concerned about bishop c7, something wild like this, and then knight takes. Then black gives up the queen, but, I mean, white has some play here, but really, with rook and two bishops against the queen, should be good for black. So bishop b6 just played, and queen takes d6 looks good, but Fedoseev played queen g5 instead. Now, I can understand why he went for this. It looks so tempting just to go for a direct attack on white's king. And Shirov's response, again, is kind of breathtaking. He just ignored what black is doing and just played d7. So it's extraordinary how he just doesn't compromise. Just straight on the whole way. f3. Mate threatened. d6 check. King goes in the corner. And now, of course, g3 is absolutely necessary to stop the checkmate. So how does black continue now? Queen f5 looks very reasonable. And, well, it could be game over in a couple of moves. So how does Shirov defend from this position? He played knight d5. So that was one of the ideas of pushing this d-pawn forward. Queen h3 played, and now the knight comes back to e3 to cover the g2 square. Now, this feels pretty flimsy. Black only needs to knock out that knight and it's checkmate. Problem is, if black tries something like bishop h6 with this idea, then bishop d4 just pegs black backwards and the king is caught in the firing line of the bishop and the queen. So after knight e3, okay, what did Fedoseev do? You know, how can he make progress here? He's got to be a little bit concerned about this move, about the pawn queening. So he just scooted back with the queen to take the pawn, and you know, everything looks fine for black, but I suspect that Fedoseev had overlooked Shirov's next move, and this shows great judgment. Shirov played rook c7, attacking the queen. Queen takes d6, so he's given up both d-pawns and just doubled on the c-file. So why has he done this? Black is now a pawn up. But white's position is superb. That rook on the 7th rank. Shirov is in 7th heaven. This is so strong. It It is very difficult to defend here for black. And you can see the initiative has switched around completely. Okay, let me give you an example. So, well, Fedoseev played rook g8 here. But let's have a look at h5. Why was rook g8 played? Well, if h5, to perhaps give the king a little bit more room, rook takes bishop. And the rook crashes in. Well, moving the king backwards is fatal, of course. Bishop d4, I mean, this is just winning for white. So, sorry, let me just get to that position again. Rook check, king h6. Well, in fact, the king gets caught. Watch this. Queen c3. Watch out for a big check. Rook g8 defends. Queen d2. Watch out for knight f5 or knight g4. Double discovered checkmate. And if g5 anyway, knight f5 check. Forks king and queen. So that's the basic threat to take here. So that's why rook g8 was played. Now, it looks impressive, but how does white squeeze the most out of this position? Bishop a5. Nice step backwards, because that bishop at some moment wants to come back to c3. It might involve perhaps a sacrifice here, but that's the big aim. Bishop b5. Oh, and of course, there's potential to take here with perhaps queen, perhaps rook. Bishop b5. Rook takes b7. Okay, just swiping a pawn. Rook c8. Now these next few moves, I'm not sure about. The simplest thing to do for white here is to exchange on c8. I'll explain why in a second. But I mean, I don't know. I didn't see the game live, so I don't know whether the player's in time pressure. But rook c2 was played. Rook takes, queen takes. And now I'm very confused, actually. I mean, I don't know whether these moves were incorrectly recorded by the digital board, but rook d8 was played. I mean, the only way to hang on here is to offer an exchange of queens, but on white is still better. But rook d8 is weird because, of course, that can just be taken. And, well, black has no comeback here. I mean, this is just completely winning for white. I mean, there really is no defense. Exchange up. Black is going to get a cut on the 8th or the 7th rank. So I don't understand rook d8 at all. Shirov played apparently queen b3, and then the rook came to c8. And now Shirov, with his next move, forced resignation. Bishop here. The reason I'm confused is because in this position, instead of rook c2, white could just take here and play bishop c3, and that transposes to the game, and that's a winning move. So whether that actually happened, and there's been some mix-up with the digital boards that didn't display it properly, I don't know. Or perhaps this was the actual move order, which is very strange. But anyway, they reached this position, which they should have done kind of logically anyway. And here Fedoseev resigned. And this just shows that Shirov's judgment that black's king side and the 7th rank would just be too weak is absolutely vindicated here. So why did Fedoseev resign? Well, let's just have a look at a couple of moves. If rook g8, then white crashes in. And queen f7. And mate follows. It's a very nice pin. And if bishop takes, let me see, queen f7. Yeah, I mean there's basically no defense along 7th rank. So queen d7, take the queen, and that is game over. As I said, there's one game to go in the group stage, and it is very close. Well, I mean, basically, I'll give you an update after the final game, but Geary is looking good. He could qualify. Rapport is looking good. But it's very tight. In the other groups, and hopefully I'll have a voice to let you know what happened after the final game. Thanks very much for watching.